The grass was 4 inches tall. I had measured it. I want you to understand that going in, I had actually measured it with a tape measure, like a man who knew what was coming. The HOA bylaws specified a maximum of 4.5 inches. I was compliant. I was demonstrably, measurably, documentably compliant. I was also, apparently, wrong. The notice appeared on a Tuesday. Of course it was a Tuesday. It was taped to my front door with the kind of aggressive precision that suggested the person who placed it had practiced the gesture in a mirror. The paper was cardstock, not regular printer paper. Cardstock, like this was a wedding invitation to my own violation. Notice of Non-Compliance, Section 4.2b, Lawn Maintenance. I read it standing in my driveway in socks, holding a bowl of cereal I had not yet eaten. And I want you to understand that the cereal was still crunchy when I started reading, and completely soggy by the time I finished. And that felt like the story of my entire homeownership experience compressed into one dairy-based metaphor. I had just bought the house 8 months ago. 3 bedrooms, decent lot, neighborhood that looked pleasant enough from the car. What the listing had not mentioned, what no listing ever mentions, was Brenda. I saw her for the first time 40 minutes after I found the notice, because of course she was already on her way to deliver it in person as a follow-up, because one violation notice was apparently not the statement she needed to make. She came around the corner of Sycamore Court with the bearing of a woman who had been appointed to something, and intended to make everyone aware of it at all times. For she was wearing a mint green polo shirt tucked into pleated khaki pants that had a crease so sharp you could have opened letters with it. Her hair was set in a style that required significant infrastructure, a kind of rigid, upswept arrangement that looked like it had been stress-tested for wind resistance. Around her neck hung a lanyard, an actual lanyard, with a badge and a pen and a small measuring tape clipped to it, like she was running a mid-level Fortune 500 company from a cul-de-sac in Ohio. Under one arm, she carried a clipboard. Not a tablet, not a phone, a clipboard, with actual paper on it. She walked like she had right-of-way in all directions simultaneously. "Mr. Mercer," she said, stopping at my property line with the kind of precision that suggested she had GPS located the exact easement boundary. "Dear, I hope you've had time to review the notice." She said, "The notice, the way other people say, the subpoena." I said I had. "Section 4.2b is very clear," she said, clicking the pen on her lanyard once, twice, 3 times. That was the tick. 3 clicks, always 3, every time she was about to say something she considered final. "Grass must not exceed 4.5 inches as measured from soil to blade tip. We've had reports." I asked who had made the report. She clicked the pen. "The HOA monitors compliance proactively." I told her I had measured. I told her it was 4 inches. I told her I had the tape measure in my pocket and would be happy to demonstrate. She looked at me with the quiet patience of someone who has decided you are not going to be easy and has already mentally scheduled the follow-up notice. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "the HOA takes community standards very seriously. I'll be back in 72 hours for a compliance inspection." She turned and walked back down the sidewalk with the smooth, unhurried confidence of a woman who has never once in her life considered the possibility that she was wrong about something. I looked down at my cereal, completely, irreversibly soggy. I want that on the record. I mowed the lawn that afternoon. I brought it down to 3¼ inches, which required 2 passes and a level of attention I had previously reserved for things that mattered. I measured 6 different points across the yard with the tape measure. Average, 3.3 inches. I photographed every measurement with my phone, time-stamped with a ruler in the frame for reference. I was not being dramatic, but I was being a man who had read the notice on cardstock and understood the nature of what had arrived in his neighborhood. Brenda came back on day 3. She walked my perimeter with her measuring tape, crouching at intervals, recording numbers on the clipboard. At the end, she looked up and told me I was compliant. Then she looked at the flower bed along my front fence and told me the crepe myrtles were potentially subject to Section 6.1a, height and placement of ornamental plantings within the front easement zone. The crepe myrtles were 2 feet tall and had been there when I bought the house. I know because I have the inspection report. I told her this. Click, click, click. Prior ownership does not confer ongoing exemption, Mr. Mercer. I went inside and cracked a beer. It was 11 in the morning. The circumstances justified it. I tried the reasonable approach the way you try a car door you already know is locked. I requested a copy of the full HOA bylaws, all 17 sections, which arrived in a 3-ring binder that weighed approximately 4 pounds and had a table of contents formatted in a font that had been discontinued by Microsoft in 2003. I read it. I want you to understand I actually read it, cover to cover, with a highlighter and a notepad, on a Saturday night, like a man who has accepted that this is now his life. I found 3 things. First, Section 4.2. B did indeed specify the grass maximum. It also, in subsection 4, specified that compliance measurements were to be taken by a designated HOA inspector using a calibrated measuring instrument, and the calibration record of which shall be available to residents upon request. I requested the calibration record for Brenda's measuring tape. She sent me an email saying the HOA considered the request outside standard protocol. I sent back a response citing the exact subsection. She replied with a notice about my mailbox post needing repainting. I know. Second, Section 11.3, buried between a section about holiday lighting timelines and a section about garbage bin visibility, contained a provision that absolutely nobody had meant to put there, or if they had meant to remove it 15 years ago and simply forgotten. So it read, residents may maintain approved livestock on their property provided the lot exceeds 0.4 acres and the relevant municipal zoning classification permits agricultural use. This was legacy language from before the development was built, when the land had been agricultural. It had never been struck from the bylaws. My lot was 0.52 acres. I had checked the county assessor's website twice before I let myself feel anything about this. Third, my neighborhood, unbeknownst to anyone who had not spent a Saturday night reading zoning records, was still technically classified as mixed residential agricultural under the county's 1987 land use map, which had not been formally superseded by any subsequent municipal ordinance. And this was the kind of thing you find at 2 in the morning when you have had 2 beers and are reading County Planning Commission minutes from a decade ago. And when you find it, you sit very still for a moment, and then you drink the rest of the second beer in one go. I did not tell anyone. I closed the laptop, went to bed, and stared at the ceiling for a while. The plan arrived fully formed somewhere around 1 a.m., the way the best plans do. Quiet, inevitable, and slightly insane. I want to tell you about Ray before I tell you about the goats, because Ray is important, and Ray deserves his introduction. Ray Kowalski lived 3 blocks over in a house that always had something partially disassembled in the driveway. A truck engine once, a riding mower that seemed to be in a state of permanent reconstruction, and on one occasion what appeared to be a commercial pizza oven that he never explained. He was built like someone had assembled a forklift in a flannel shirt. He had a beard that operated on its own timeline and eyes that were always slightly amused, like he was waiting for you to get to the part where this got interesting. I had met Ray at a hardware store 6 months earlier, when we both reached for the last box of a specific deck screw at the same time, and, instead of the normal, awkward moment, he had looked at me and said, "What are you building?" and we had talked for 45 minutes. That is the whole origin story. He was exactly the kind of man who had a guy for everything, and considered all official processes optional suggestions. I called him on a Wednesday night. I explained the situation. I explained the zoning provision. I explained the plan. There was a pause. "Goats," Ray said. "Goats," I confirmed. Another pause. "How many goats we talking?" "I was thinking 40. The sound he made was not quite a laugh, and not quite a gasp. It was the noise a man makes when he realizes his Thursday just got a lot more interesting. "I know a guy," he said. "He does agricultural equipment rental. I'll call him tonight." I asked if his guy rented goats. "Logan," Ray said, with the patience of a man explaining something obvious. "My guy rents everything. The goats arrived on a Friday morning in a trailer that Ray drove into my neighborhood at 7:15 a.m., which was, and I cannot stress this enough, 30 minutes before Brenda's standing Saturday walkthrough, which she had announced in a HOA newsletter with the headline, "Community Standards Inspection. All residents please note." She had moved it to Friday that week. I know because I had been watching her schedule the same way a chess player watches the other side of the board. Before the goats, I had set up 4 cameras. 2 mounted on the eaves of my house, 1 on a tripod in the side yard, and 1, this was Ray's contribution, which I had not planned for and which I will describe when we get there, mounted in a location that I still consider a stroke of unhinged genius. I had created a live stream channel the night before, written a description that said only, "Lawn maintenance, live, starting Friday." I had told 8 people. Those 8 people had, apparently, told many more 8 people. By the time Ray backed the trailer up to my driveway gate, there were 417 viewers on the stream. I know because I could see the counter on my phone. I set the phone down, put on my coffee, and went outside. The goats came off the trailer with the calm, purposeful energy of professionals arriving at a job site. 40 Nigerian dwarf goats, each one approximately the size and temperament of a very confident toaster, spreading out across my yard in a coordinated fashion that suggested they had done this before, and considered grass a personal challenge. They were magnificent. They were also, legally, compliant livestock under Section 11.3 of the Sycamore Court HOA bylaws. I want that on the record. Ray set up a temporary low fence line around the property perimeter, and then leaned against my truck with a coffee thermos, and looked at the yard with the satisfaction of a man beholding something he helped build. "You file the agricultural notification with the county?" he asked. I told him I had filed it Thursday morning, certified mail, with a copy sent to the HOA's registered address. Ray nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I also set up something." He said it the way you say something when you're trying to be casual about something that is not casual. He pointed to the oak tree at the corner of my front yard, and I saw it. A second tripod, higher up, angled to cover the full front of the property and, critically, the sidewalk approach from the direction of Sycamore Court. "Wide angle?" I asked. 4K, Ray said. "Stream's already running on a separate channel. I merged the feeds." I looked at him. "My nephew runs a streaming setup," he said. "He's been on since 6:30. You've got 1,200 viewers." I did not plan for that. I want to be clear that I did not plan for that. I finished my coffee and watched a goat eat a dandelion with an expression of pure, uncomplicated joy, and I thought, this is going to be fine. It was better than fine. It was a Tuesday's worth of fine, compressed into one Friday morning, and all of it was about to arrive wearing a mint green polo. I heard her before I saw her. There was a sound from the direction of the sidewalk that was not quite a word, and not quite a noise, something between a gasp and the sound a printer makes when it encounters a document it refuses to believe is real. Then, footsteps. Fast and precise, the specific rhythm of a woman who has decided to cover ground without technically running, because running would be undignified. Brenda came around the corner of my front fence at 8:03 a.m. and stopped. She was in full inspection gear, the mint green polo, the khakis with the aggressive crease, the lanyard bearing its full complement of tools including the measuring tape and the pen, the clipboard held in 2 hands at sternum height. Her hair was architecturally complete. She looked like a woman who had prepared for a routine compliance walkthrough and arrived at a different event entirely. The yard contained 40 goats. For a moment she simply stood there, and I watched her brain try to process the information through every available channel simultaneously. Her mouth opened, then it closed, and then it opened again. A goat looked up at her with complete, serene indifference and went back to eating. "Mr. Mercer." Her voice was controlled. I will give her that. Whatever she was experiencing internally, she had decided that controlled was still available to her as an option. "What is this?" I told her it was lawn maintenance. "Those are goats." I confirmed they were goats. Click, click, click. "You cannot have goats in a residential neighborhood." I told her about Section 11.3. I said it the way a carpenter describes a nail, not looking for her reaction, just locating the fact. I had printed a copy of the subsection and had it in my back pocket, which I produced and handed to her. She took it without looking at it, which was a mistake, because looking at it would have told her what was in it. And what was in it was going to be relevant in approximately 45 seconds. She looked at the goats. She looked at the cameras. She looked at the stream counter on the mounted phone display that Ray had helpfully set up on a small folding table near the front gate, which now read 3,400 viewers. She looked back at me. "I will be contacting the HOA attorney," she said. I told her that was absolutely her right, and that I had already contacted my own attorney on Thursday, who had reviewed the bylaws, the zoning classification, and the county agricultural notification, and found everything in order. I said this calmly. I said it quietly. The funnier and more accurate I knew I was being, the quieter my voice got. Brenda looked at the printed subsection for the first time. I watched her read it, or I watched the precise moment she found the word livestock. Her jaw did something involuntary, a small, tight motion, like a hinge that had been asked to perform a movement it wasn't designed for. She read it again. The clipboard lowered approximately 2 inches. "This language is outdated," she said. I agreed that it was old language. I mentioned that old language, in a binding legal document, was still binding. "The intent," I said I was sure the intent was interesting and that I'd be happy to hear the HOA's argument about intent in a formal dispute proceeding, which I had also prepared a request for, also in my back pocket, also available to her right now if she wanted it. She did not take the second document. She turned and looked at the street. And that is when I saw it. The moment I had not planned for, but the unguarded moment that gives a man full moral permission to do everything that comes after. She wasn't looking at the goats, or the cameras, or the viewers. She was looking at the house across the street. 14 Sycamore Court, with its manicured lawn, and its window boxes and its ornamental Japanese maple positioned at exactly the correct distance from the property line. The Delacroix house. Perfect. Always perfect. A lawn that looked like it had been trimmed with nail scissors and aspirations. Brenda was looking at it with an expression that wasn't anger. It was hunger. Pure, uncut, undisguised envy. The expression of a woman who had organized an entire system of rules, specifically so that nothing in this neighborhood could be better than what she had decided was acceptable, which also happened to be precisely as good as her own. Not community standards. Personal standards. Her standards imposed outward. She didn't know I was watching her. She recovered quickly. But I had seen it, and I noted it the way you note a thing you intend to use. And I got a little quieter. "I'll be filing a formal complaint," she said, and her voice was back to its regulation temperature. I told her I would welcome it. She turned and walked back down the sidewalk. A goat followed her to the fence line and watched her go with the alert, unblinking attention of a very small security camera. The stream counter clicked to 4,100. I went inside and made eggs. This is not a narrative detail. I was genuinely hungry, and the situation was under control. I want you to picture that. 40 goats working over my lawn with quiet professionalism. 4 cameras running. At 4,000 people watching a suburban revenge plot unfold in real time, and me inside making scrambled eggs with the measured calm of a man who has done the paperwork. Ray knocked on the back door 20 minutes later. He came in, poured himself coffee without asking, which I respected, and sat down at the kitchen table. "She's been on the phone since she hit the corner," he said. He had apparently watched her through his rear-view mirror on a loop around the block. 2 different calls, speed dial fast. I asked if he thought she'd come back. Ray considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "She'll come back with someone," he said. "She won't come back alone again." He was right. He was back at my table for 4 hours, during which time the goats maintained consistent performance, the stream climbed to 11,000 viewers, and a woman from 3 houses down, Mrs. Patricia Osei, 71 years old, and the owner of what might have been the neighborhood's finest garden, dragged a lawn chair to her front porch, poured something from a thermos into a cup, and sat down with the specific settled energy of a person who has decided this is her entertainment for the day. She raised the cup once toward my fence. I raised my coffee mug back from the porch. Nothing else needed to be said. At 2 in the afternoon, Brenda returned. She was not alone. She had brought Gerald Finch, who served as the HOA's community liaison, and possessed the energy of a man who had taken a job he believed would be peaceful, and had recently been forced to revise that assessment. Gerald was wearing a polo of his own. Navy, uncreased, so a different species of preparation entirely, and he was carrying a manila folder, which meant someone had been doing paperwork, and paperwork meant they had found something, and something meant this was about to get more interesting. She had also, apparently, called every member of the HOA board, because behind Gerald came 3 other people I vaguely recognized from the welcome committee that had visited when I first moved in. A visit during which Brenda had presented me with a laminated copy of the bylaws and said, with the tone of a benediction, "We take standards very seriously here." 3 of them now stood on my sidewalk, looking at the goats with an assortment of expressions that ranged from professional concern to barely suppressed delight. "Mr. Mercer," Brenda said. She had refortified. The voice was authority temperature again. The clipboard was back at sternum height, and she had added a second pen to the lanyard, which told me she intended to write a lot of things down. "The HOA has determined that your current use of the property constitutes a nuisance under Section 9.4 of the Community Covenants." I asked her to read me Section 9.4. She did. It defined a nuisance as any activity producing unreasonable noise, odor, or visual disruption to neighboring properties. I asked her which of those 3 the goats constituted. "Visual disruption," she said, without blinking. I looked at the goats. They were eating grass, quietly, efficiently, with a level of professional focus that many humans in my experience had failed to match. One of them was sitting down. I looked back at Brenda. "Brenda," I said, and I used her first name deliberately, the first time I had, and I watched her register it. "There are 11,000 people watching this right now, and what they're watching is 40 goats eating grass on a lot that is zoned for agricultural use, under a bylaw that your organization wrote and never removed. If you file a nuisance complaint, the response I file will include the zoning documentation, the certified mail receipt, the calibration record request that you declined to provide, and a timeline of every notice issued to me since I moved in 8 months ago. It will be a very interesting document." Gerald Finch was looking at Brenda now, with the expression of a man who wanted very badly to be somewhere else. Brenda's pen clicked. Once, then twice. She raised it for the third click and stopped. For just a half-second, her hand stopped. She clicked it a third time, but it cost her something. "Ward, this is not over," she said. I told her I agreed, and that I was available during standard HOA business hours. She turned to go. And that was when Ray, who had been standing behind me in my doorway the entire time with his coffee thermos, said, at conversational volume, to no one in particular, "You know, I've got a buddy who does alpacas. Case you need the backup." Gerald Finch made a sound into his folder. Mrs. Osei, from across the street, raised her thermos. The meltdown happened on Saturday morning. I want you to understand the context. By Saturday, the stream had, at its peak, Friday evening, reached 47,000 concurrent viewers. Someone had clipped the original goat arrival footage, and it had been shared in enough places that I had received, by Friday night, 17 media inquiries, the 2 of which were from outlets I had actually heard of. A local news van had done a slow drive-by Friday afternoon, which one of the cameras had captured in glorious 4K. The goats had been performing for 24 hours and showed no signs of losing enthusiasm. My lawn, I should mention, was being maintained at a height that would have satisfied Section 4.2b to a degree that bordered on insult. Brenda had sent 3 emails Friday night. The first was a formal nuisance complaint notice. The second was a notice that the nuisance complaint was pending board review. The third was, and I want you to appreciate the escalation here, a notice informing me that my mailbox post paint was non-compliant. At 11:30 p.m., about my mailbox post. I slept extremely well. Saturday morning, I was on the porch with coffee when I saw her coming, but 8 a.m. I saw her from 2 blocks away. The mint green polo, the khakis, the lanyard, the clipboard, all the usual equipment. But there was something different in the walk. The regulation pace was still there, but under it was something else. Something with more RPM, like a machine running hotter than its designed operating temperature. Gerald Finch was with her again. So were 2 of the board members from yesterday. And behind them, keeping a distance that suggested plausible deniability, a small cluster of neighbors who had heard that something was happening and had decided to be present for it. Mrs. Osei was already in her lawn chair. She had brought a blanket this time. Brenda pushed open my front gate, which she did not have the right to open without permission, and which I noted for the record, and walked into my yard with the energy of someone executing a decision they made before they woke up. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Her voice was at regulation temperature, but the container was showing stress fractures. "I am here to serve formal notice of immediate compliance action under—" And then one of the goats, a specific goat, a particular goat, a goat I had mentally named Gerald II for reasons that will be obvious, walked directly up to her and with the calm, decisive purposefulness of a professional, ate a corner of her clipboard. Not the paper, the actual clipboard. A corner of the pressed board, taken cleanly, chewed once, considered, found acceptable. Brenda looked down. The goat looked up. The stream, which had been at 22,000 viewers at 8 a.m. on a Saturday, began to climb. She pulled the clipboard back. The goat released it without drama. A small scalloped bite mark remained in the lower right corner. "These animals need to be—" Click, click, click. Mr. Mercer, I am formally informing you. A second goat had arrived beside the first one and was investigating her shoelace with the focused attention of a researcher. Get these animals away from me. The volume broke loose from regulation containment with the sudden totality of a dam that had been showing small cracks since yesterday morning. Not a raised voice, a detonation. The sound filled the street. Mrs. Osei's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. A man washing his car 2 houses down went still with a sponge in his hand. Brenda stepped back from the goats, and her left heel came down on a patch of uneven lawn, and she lurched. Not a fall, but a controlled catch. But the clipboard swung wide in the recovery, and the pen on her lanyard came free and hit the ground, and the lanyard pulled sideways, and for one extended moment her whole assembly of authority was visibly, physically compromised. She got her feet under her. She retrieved the pen. She straightened the lanyard. The clipboard came back up to sternum height, with the rigid determination of a woman who has decided that composure is non-negotiable, even when everything in her immediate environment is negotiating against it. This is a residential neighborhood, she said, at a volume that left no ambiguity about the capitalization. You cannot run a farm in a residential neighborhood. This is not... Click, click, click. I have lived in this neighborhood for 14 years, and in 14 years there has never been a situation like this because we have standards, and those standards exist because... She stopped. She actually stopped, mid-sentence, mid-breath. Something had shifted in her face. The mechanism behind the anger had caught on something, and what surfaced for 3 full seconds before she controlled it again was not authority and not fury. It was something smaller and more honest. The look of a woman who had built a very large and complicated structure around a feeling she had never named out loud, and who had just heard herself getting close to naming it. Gerald Finch was staring at his shoes. The 2 board members were finding various points in the middle distance extremely compelling. The cluster of neighbors had gone very still. A goat was sitting down approximately 3 feet behind Brenda with the expression of a theater-goer who has found an excellent seat. Because, Brenda continued, quieter now but not quiet, some of us have put everything into making this community what it is, and one person decides to just... She turned and looked at 14 Sycamore Court. The Delacroix house. The perfect lawn. The window boxes. She looked at it for 2 seconds. She looked back at my yard, with its 40 goats and its cameras and its 31,000 viewers. You don't even care, she said. And that sentence was not at volume. That sentence was at something else entirely, the sound of a woman who had meant to say something official and said something true instead. Then the clipboard hit the ground. Not thrown, dropped. Her hand simply let it go. It hit the lawn with a flat, final clap of sound, and the measuring tape detached from the lanyard clasp on impact and unrolled about 18 inches across the grass, lying there like a very small and symbolic piece of evidence. The goat that had been sitting down walked over and sniffed it. Brenda looked at the clipboard. She looked at the measuring tape. She did not pick them up. Something about picking them up was apparently not available to her in that moment. She looked at Gerald Finch, who was still investigating his shoes with tremendous focus. She looked at the cameras. The stream counter, visible on Ray's mounted display by the fence, read 31,400. This isn't finished, she said. It was a very small sentence for a very large moment, and it arrived in a register that was not authority and not anger, but something more like a woman closing a door behind herself. She walked out of my yard. She walked through the gate she had opened without permission, which now she left open behind her, which was technically a bylaw violation, and I did not mention it. She walked down the sidewalk in the direction she had come from. Gerald and the board members followed at the pace of people who had decided that following quietly was the only defensible option remaining. The cluster of neighbors did not follow. They stayed. One of them, a man named Dale, from 4 houses down, who had never once spoken to me in 8 months, started clapping. Not loud, not fast, just slow, deliberate applause, or the kind that comes from someone who has made a decision about what they just witnessed and wants their position known. Mrs. Osei raised her thermos. Ray, from the doorway where he had been standing with his coffee for the entire duration, said nothing for a long moment. Then, 43 seconds. He looked at his watch. I timed it, from the clipboard drop to when she cleared the gate. 43 seconds. I looked at him. Just seemed like information worth having, he said. The goat that had eaten the clipboard corner walked back to the center of the lawn and resumed its professional responsibilities. Life on Sycamore Court returned to its natural operating temperature. The HOA attorney sent a letter the following Wednesday, reviewing the relevant bylaw provisions, the zoning classification, and the county agricultural notification, and concluding, in language that I suspected caused the attorney some personal difficulty, that the current use of my property was compliant with all applicable covenants and municipal codes, and that no enforcement action was available to the HOA at this time. The letter was 3 pages. The relevant sentence was 1. I had the goats for 4 days total. Ray's guy came and collected them on Monday morning, and they left with the same professional equanimity with which they had arrived. The lawn was, at that point, maintained at an average height of 2.8 inches, which was a full inch and 7/10 below the section 4.2, B, maximum, and I photographed it because I am who I am. The live stream had accumulated, by the time I stopped it Monday afternoon, a total of 412,000 views. There was a compilation video someone else made that had more, but I'm not counting that because I didn't make it. The comments were, in aggregate, supportive. One person said the goat that ate the clipboard was the hero of 2024. And I thought about disputing this on a technicality, but ultimately let it stand. I received a formal written apology from the HOA board 2 weeks later, signed by every member except Brenda, who had stepped down as president the Friday after the meltdown, citing personal reasons. Gerald Finch was the interim president. He emailed me on his first day to ask if I had any complaints I wanted to raise. I told him I thought the neighborhood was looking great. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji, which is not the response I would have predicted from a man who had owned a navy polo and a manila folder, and I respected the growth. The crepe myrtles were never mentioned again. I was sitting on the porch Sunday night, the week after the goats left, with a beer and no particular agenda, watching the neighborhood do its Sunday night things, sprinklers cycling, a kid on a bike making the same loop for the 6th time, lights coming on in windows as the evening settled in. The lawn was 2.8 inches. Documented. Mrs. Osei waved from across the street. I raised my beer. A moving truck had appeared that afternoon 3 doors down. New neighbors. I'd seen them from a distance. A couple, 2 kids, a dog that appeared to have no relationship with the concept of personal space. They'd waved when they saw me. Normal waves, and the uncomplicated kind. I watched the truck for a while, made a mental note to introduce myself. Be neighborly. Maybe mention in passing that the HOA bylaws were available in a binder on request, that Section 11.3 was worth a read, and that I knew a guy who could get you a good rate on livestock rental on relatively short notice. The beer was cold. The grass was within spec. Somewhere on Sycamore Court, a measuring tape was lying in a drawer without a clipboard attached to it. I finished the beer, went inside, left the porch light on.